In the middle of the Hudson River, surrounded by the mist of cold mornings and the reflection of New York's skyscrapers, there's an almost imperceptible island. Small, unremarkable, easily ignored by those passing by. But anyone who looks at the map and sees the name etched there, Noah's Brig, feels a spark of curiosity. Could it be a tribute to a legendary captain? A ship lost in time? A tale of bravery? None of the above. The truth is far less heroic, and infinitely more humiliating. The name of this island doesn't honor a grand achievement, but rather a grotesque mistake. But what makes a mistake unforgettable? Many ships have sunk in the Hudson River over the centuries. Storms, collisions, human errors, there's no shortage of tragic stories, but none of them left a mark quite like Noah's. What happened that night was so absurd that his name was never forgotten. Not because he bravely faced treacherous waters or defied the impossible. Quite the opposite. His mistake was so avoidable, so obvious, that it became a cautionary tale among sailors, a warning about the dangers of arrogance. Because in the end, what destroyed Noah's ship wasn't the sea, it was himself. And to this day, those who sail through those waters still wonder, how could such an experienced captain make such a foolish mistake? Noah wasn't just any sailor. He didn't just command a ship. He saw himself as the very master of the seas. He was an experienced captain, no doubt about that. He knew those waters like few did, navigated with confidence, and had the respect of his crew. But there was one problem. He also believed he was always right. To Noah, caution was just another word for cowardice. Slowing down in the fog? Weakness? Yielding to another ship? Never. Listening to crew warnings? A complete waste of time, and it was precisely this mindset that made him a legend. Not for glorious achievements, but for one single night when his stubbornness went beyond all limits. Because when the sea demands humility, it takes a heavy toll on those who refuse to yield. And Noah was about to learn that the hard way. Today, navigation follows clear rules with radars, radios, and precise signals. But in Noah's time, the sea was a true battleground. The right-of-way wasn't just a matter of safety, it was a game of power. Captains didn't just steer their ships, they defended their honor with every maneuver. Yielding? Only if the other captain was stronger, faster, or more experienced. Otherwise, it was seen as a sign of weakness. It was a culture driven by hierarchy, pride, and of course, stubbornness. And in this world, Noah stood out, not for his wisdom or caution, but for his refusal to give up what he believed was his. To him, the sea had rules, and every single one played in his favor. But that night, fate decided to prove that the ocean doesn't answer to stubborn men, and Noah didn't realize it until it was too late. In the world of navigation, every captain has a reputation. Some are remembered for their bravery, others for their prudence. Noah? He was known for one thing: pure, unshakable stubbornness. Sailors in the region knew if they crossed paths with his ship, there was no point expecting courtesy or common sense. Noah never swerved. It didn't matter if the other vessel was bigger, smaller, faster, or more fragile. If it was in his way, it was the other captain's problem. The more experienced sailors had already learned to avoid confrontations with him. But the newcomers? Many found out the hard way that Noah didn't negotiate space on the sea. The truth was, Noah didn't mind his reputation. In fact, he liked being feared. To him, giving way meant admitting weakness, and weakness had no place in his name. But the sea isn't impressed by inflated egos. And that night, Noah met something he couldn't intimidate. The problem was, he didn't realize it in time. The night Noah would become a legend started like any other. The wind blew steadily, the sails were firm, and the crew went about their routines without much concern. But then, the Hudson changed its mood. Out of nowhere, fog began to form. At Isle Fate. First, a light, almost harmless mist. Then, a thick, dense wall that swallowed everything around it. Visibility plummeted. Any prudent captain would have slowed down, navigated cautiously, followed the survival instincts that every experienced sailor develops over the years. But Noah was different, or maybe just insane. He didn't bother with insignificant details like thick fog. To him, the sea was meant to bend to his will, not the other way around. And then, in the middle of that damp darkness, something appeared ahead. Tall, dark, motionless silhouettes. Another ship? An unexpected obstacle? A challenge to his dominance over the waters? Noah narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His heart pounded, and his arrogance did the rest. The dense fog distorted everything, turning shadows into threats and reflections into monsters. But Noah didn't hesitate. In front of him, two tall, slender masts emerged from the darkness, still defiant, as if they had been placed there just to test his patience. He frowned. Another ship. It had to be. And a ship just sitting there, right in the middle of the way, not even signaling its presence. An insult. The crew started whispering, anxiously. "Captain, should we slow down?" But Noah just laughed, keeping his eyes fixed on those insolent silhouettes. Slow down? His voice dripped with disdain. They should get out of my way. His pride boiled. Who dared block Noah's path? The answer was simple. No one. And with that unshakable certainty, he made the worst decision of his life. The ship kept moving forward, cutting through the Hudson's waters with determination. Noah didn't slow down. He didn't steer away. He expected that at any moment, the masts ahead would move, that the other captain would realize who he was dealing with and give way. But the masts didn't move. The crew grew restless. "Captain, are you sure we should keep going?" Noah clenched his jaw. "Of course! Who on this river would dare challenge me?" Silence was the only answer. The sailors' hearts grew heavy. Something was wrong. Very wrong. But no one dared defy Noah. And so, the ship sailed on, straight into disaster. Noah squinted at the motionless silhouettes ahead. His pride had already decided. He wouldn't change course. "If they won't move, they can sink," he growled, gripping the helm tightly. The crew held their breath. No, sane sailor would charge blindly at an unknown ship. But Noah wasn't just any sailor. He charged forward, fast, determined, unstoppable. And then, the impact struck like thunder. The ship's hull groaned. The wood cracked like a breaking bone. The crash tore through the night. Men were thrown to the ground. Ropes snapped. The once mighty ship had just sealed its fate. But the worst was yet to come. Because as the fog began to lift, Noah saw something that made his blood run cold. There was no ship. The crash was deafening. A sharp, splintering sound, as if the very hull of the ship was screaming in pain. The impact sent sailors sprawling. Ropes snapped in the air, and barrels rolled across the deck as the entire ship trembled under the force of the collision. Noah gripped the helm tightly, his heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The ship, so solid and imposing just moments ago, now tilted to one side, groaning like a wounded beast. The crew scrambled to their feet, groaning in confusion, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. Noah, still gripping the helm, looked ahead and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. And as the fog began to lift, he finally saw the truth. There was no other ship. Noah blinked repeatedly, trying to force his eyes to see something different, but the truth stood there, raw and undeniable. There was no other ship. There never had been. What he had seen as enemy masts ready to defy him were nothing more than two dead tree trunks rooted in the small island ahead. The ship hadn't crashed into a rebellious vessel refusing to give way. He had thrown it straight into land. The silence that took over the deck was worse than any storm. The sailors, once panicked, now looked at Noah, unsure whether to laugh or fear his reaction. The captain, so sure of himself just minutes earlier, now stood face to face with the cruelest of realities. He hadn't just destroyed his own ship. He had done so fighting an enemy that never even existed. And there, as water began seeping into the hull, Noah realized that his legend was sealed, not as an unbeatable captain, but as the man who sank his own ship out of sheer stubbornness. The wood creaked ominously as the ship tilted further. The smell of salt water mixed with the damp wood and the thick shame hanging in the air. Noah said nothing. The sailors exchanged glances, waiting for an order, a shout, anything, but the captain just stood there, staring at those tree trunks, as if he could change reality by sheer will. Then, hesitantly, one of the crew members broke the silence. captain. "The ship is sinking." Noah clenched his fists. He knew. He had always known. But hearing it out loud hurt more than the impact itself. Another sailor, trying to stay composed, suggested, "We need to abandon ship, now." The lifeboats were quickly lowered, the men climbing in with urgency, but Noah remained on deck, his eyes fixed on the broken hull. The crew waited for him to say something, a justification, a curse against fate, anything, but all he did was let out a long, heavy sigh, before finally muttering, "They should have moved out of the way." A muffled chuckle escaped from one of the sailors. Noah shot him a deadly glare, but it was too late. The legend had begun. When he finally stepped into the lifeboat, carrying the full weight of his humiliation, he knew that no matter how far he sailed, his story would forever be tied to that patch of land. His name was marked. Days later, as the sailors drank in a tavern, one of them, between sips, casually remarked, "And that island, huh? The place where Noah sank his own ship? They should call it Noah's Brig." Laughter erupted. And just like that, the name stuck. An eternal reminder that at sea and in life, blind pride can steer you straight to ruin. Noah survived the disaster, but in a way, he died that night. Not physically, but in the one thing he valued most, his reputation. Once he had been known as a relentless, feared, and respected captain. Afterward, he became the man who wrecked his own ship fighting against two trees. Sailors chuckled quietly whenever he walked by. In taverns, his story was told and retold, each time with more exaggeration and mockery. And Noah? He learned to avoid their eyes, to ignore the whispers. But he could never escape the weight of his mistake. And ironically, his name would last far longer than he ever did. Maritime, that insignificant piece of land, took on a much greater meaning. Sailors started using it as a reference point, a spot on the map that everyone knew. Turn before you. Reach Noah's Brig, unless you want to end up like him. The name stuck. And years later, when cartographers needed to officially record that little island, there was no doubt about what to call it. After all, Noah may have lost his ship, but he secured his immortality. Today, few know the true origin of the name Noah's Brig. Some believe it was just an ordinary shipwreck. Others think it was a lost pirate vessel. But those who know the real story never forget the irony behind it. Because in the end, Noah got what he wanted. His name would be remembered forever, just not the way he expected. If Noah had slowed down, if he had listened to his crew, if he had even considered the possibility that he might be wrong, everything would have been different. But he was so obsessed with proving a point, so convinced that the world should bend to his will, that he never realized he was sailing straight into his own downfall. In the end, what destroyed Noah wasn't the sea, nor an invisible enemy. It was himself, and that's the scariest part, because if we stop to think about it, how many times do we insist on something? Not because we're right, but because we don't want to admit we're wrong. How many times do we charge ahead blindly, ignoring the warnings, pretending we know the way, when in reality, we're just afraid of looking weak? Noah's arrogance sank a ship, but in real life, how many careers, how many relationships, how many dreams have been destroyed simply because someone refused to see the truth? Maybe we've all been a little like Noah at some point. And now, I ask you, when was a time in your life when you insisted on something purely out of pride, only to realize later that you could have avoided disaster? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And of course, if you enjoyed this story and want more sea legends, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. And if you know someone who needs to hear this lesson, share this with them. Now click on the video popping up on your screen to watch another unbelievable story from the sea. A big hug, and see you in the next sea tale.